Right, so the Houthis have struck again, it seems. And by struck, they've beyond doubt struck. They've hit their target this time, as a hypersonic ballistic missile launched from Yemen has struck near Terminal 3 of Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. After having taken many a shot at this target since the collapse of the Gaza ceasefire by Israel, finding their mark marks a significant turning point in the regional escalation surrounding the war in Gaza and Israel's siege on the Palestinian people, with the Houthis regularly claiming their objectives have been achieved, whilst Israel has consistently reported they intercepted any rockets fired their way. Well, for the first time since the end of that ceasefire, a missile originating from Yemen has definitely managed to bypass Israel's supposed advanced air defense systems, both the long-range Israeli Arrow system and the US-provided THAAD defense system, and caused real physical damage on Israeli territory, injuring 8 civilians and disrupting international air travel. And by saying that international travel to Israel is now unsafe, this time they've definitely proven that. Moreover, it forces a reckoning with the Trump administration's undeclared and increasingly unpopular military campaign in Yemen, one conducted in the name of defending Israel and combating Iranian influence, yet yielding little strategic success and likely increasing American and civilian casualties. I say likely because we don't know. And we don't know because, unlike the Biden administration, the Trump one appears to be determined to cover such figures up and have now been called out for that. Without these, it becomes virtually impossible to assess or critique these ongoing strikes on Yemen. So what has Trump got to hide about them then? Right, so the missile strike on Ben Gurion Airport has properly given Israel a shock, bit of a wake-up call, shaking them out of their arrogance somewhat, because there's no doubt this time that the Houthis did find their mark. A long-range hypersonic missile from Yemen striking one of the most fortified areas of Israeli airspace represents a massive blow to Israel and is a big win for the Houthis, now able to say beyond doubt that even where the air defences are supposedly the strongest, in and around Tel Aviv, they can now beat them, and have done. And more to the point, the people living there now know it too. According to reports from multiple outlets, the missile hit close to Terminal 3, the main international terminal at Ben Gurion Airport. The attack injured 8 people and temporarily halted all flights, forcing the Israeli government to divert air traffic and prompting at least 6 international airlines, including Lufthansa, British Airways and Emirates, to suspend their operations to Tel Aviv well into next week at least. The Houthis, of course, claimed responsibility immediately, declaring that the airport was no longer safe for international travel due to Israel's continuing siege of Gaza, something they've said before, but this time they've proven it and proven exactly why. The statement also framed the attack as an act of solidarity with the Palestinian people, as is typical for the group. It is, after all, why they are attacking Israel. Press TV covered the words of Houthi spokesman Yahya Saree in relation to this strike. Yahya Saree, the spokesman for Yemen's armed forces, said in a televised statement that the military operation against a key Israeli airport was conducted with a hypersonic ballistic missile and hit its target successfully. The spokesman pointed out that the results of the operation were the failure of the American and Israeli interceptor systems to repel the projectile, the escape of more than 3 million Zionists to shelters, and the complete cessation of airport traffic for more than an hour. Stressing that the operation was in support of the oppressed Palestinian people and their fighters in Gaza, Saree warned in his statement that Ben Gurion is no longer safe for air navigation. Yemen, its people, leadership and army will, with Allah's help, continue to stand firm and steadfast in the face of American aggression, never abandoning its religious, moral and humanitarian duty towards the oppressed Palestinian people, regardless of the consequences, until the aggression on Gaza ceases and the siege is lifted, the spokesman added. For decades, Israel has invested heavily in its missile defense network, boasting systems such as the Iron Dome, which is the best known. Then there's also David's Sling, there are the Arrow systems, and most recently the US-supplied Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD system. They have a lot of different air defense systems. How does anything get through? Well, this hypersonic ballistic missile from Yemen did, fired in the early hours of this morning as it was, and it evaded all of these systems, and major questions will now be being asked about that. As you might expect, therefore, Israel's mad Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, has launched an internal investigation into how the missile bypassed all of its different layers of defences. Officials are now considering whether the Houthis might have significantly improved their missile technology, possibly with foreign assistance, or whether the current conflict has exposed cracks in Israel's technological armour, so to speak. An ongoing strike prior to the Gaza ceasefire were making clear, with interceptor missile batteries running out of munitions or being destroyed themselves. Is it all now happening again too? Are they running out of munitions, or are the Houthis just getting around them? But Netanyahu and Katz have readily threatened retaliation already, as usual. Benny Gantz of the National Unity Party has chosen to blame Iran for this, arguing that the missile technology and targeting guidance could only have come from Tehran. There's no direct evidence to back up this claim at all. The Houthis are far more autonomous now, arguably, than they have been previously. It's far likelier that these accusations are just part of Israel's ongoing efforts to undermine US-Iran nuclear negotiations, turning every regional flare-up into a pretext to derail that. Israel fearing the US will let Iran continue its nuclear research. No nuclear weapons involved in that whatsoever, as both US and UN inspections have proven. But it's never stopped Israel before, and they won't stop this nonsense now. The US has increasingly become embroiled in Yemen since that Gaza ceasefire fell, of course, especially when the Trump administration launched Operation Rough Rider, seeking to avert more promised Houthi attacks on Israeli shipping using Red Sea shipping lanes and US warships. The campaign has involved hundreds of airstrikes, around 800 of them to date, and the deployment of US naval assets as well, including the USS Harry S. Truman in the Red Sea, and now joined by the USS Carl Vinson in the Gulf of Aden. Despite the scale of these operations and how many they have carried out, they have failed to make any significant impact on Houthi capabilities whatsoever. No matter what they do, Israel is still getting targeted for missile strikes. Attacks on both Israeli and American targets have also continued unabated, with the most recent strikes prior to that hit on Ben Gurion Airport seeing the Truman having to make such evasive manoeuvres it ended up tossing an F-18 jet and its towing tractor straight into the sea, all before running off northwards, which sparked a bit of a debate as to whether the Truman itself had actually been hit. In response to that, however, the Pentagon has ordered the Truman to remain stationed in the Red Sea, so hurt or not, crippled or not, they're staying. That order, however, rather disturbingly, came a day after reports came out about US casualty figures from the public in relation to its undeclared, not at all ratified de facto war on the Houthis. Because officials from CENTCOM, the office of the Secretary of Signalgate, but supposedly a defence beat Hegseth, and the White House itself have all refused to disclose how many American service members have been killed or injured since March, when Operation Rough Rider began. Now, goodness knows we can criticise the administration of genocide Joe Biden for being just as trigger-happy in the Middle East in defending Israel as Trump is being. This kind of information was always readily available and regularly released under his administration. So what's the deal with Donald Trump then? The lack of accountability has already drawn criticism from veterans groups and members of Congress, as well as alternative and independent media asking these same questions. Without clear data, it becomes nearly impossible to assess the cost of the war, let alone hold decision makers accountable for the choices they have been making. And this not only undermines democracy, but also risks repeating the failures of past US military interventions in the Middle East, notably against Yemen, where they have always failed. And it really ought to have more people questioning exactly how bad are matters here, that the US government are continuing with unabated, for no benefit to the American people at all, just for Israel, this fight, a nation which more than 53% of Americans are no longer even supportive of. So in addition to the shady behind-closed-doors decision-making of little Donny, the UK has now rejoined the fray against the Houthis too, conducting airstrikes against Houthi positions in what it claims are targeted precision operations. The Royal Air Force's involvement has now been confirmed, therefore, once again since the Gaza ceasefire fell. But there seems to be more to come. It seems perhaps the aforementioned Signalgate bungling that had J.D. Vance referring to Europe as pathetic for not fighting with them for Israel, and had Hegseth apparently snarling that Europe were freeloading on the US, might have stirred Keir Starmer into jumping to Trump's fiddle all the more. After all, when the UK was being threatened by Trump over tariffs, we saw Keir Starmer seeking to placate him with tax cuts for US tech giants being offered up instead of standing up to him. Now these insults against Europe have come out. Here comes the aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales, now en route to the Red Sea as part of Carrier Strike Group 25. Officially, this deployment is a routine exercise. However, many observers, and particularly those in Yemen, see it as an escalation and a reinforcement of the Western military access alongside the US and Israel. The Houthis have responded forcefully to the UK's actions, from the airstrikes that have just happened, along with this strike group that's on the way, in a statement released after the latest wave of UK airstrikes. Houthi leadership warning that the United Kingdom would now be treated as part of a trio of evil, along with the United States and Israel. Nobody in the UK voted to be called that. Starmer can always, of course, find money for war like every other warmongering Western leader we can't see the back of fast enough, especially if it implies servitude and acquiescence to Donald Trump all on top of that. Since October 2023, over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed by the official figures, so the likely true figure could be 4 times that. Gaza has been razed north to south, as we know. Gaza remains under a total blockade, with aid trucks denied entry. Starvation now being used as a weapon. Images of starving children and flattened neighbourhoods have circulated worldwide, fueling the outrage so many of us feel. And it is for this reason the Houthis are doing what they're doing, lest we forget. So military strikes against them to preserve the interests of the nation inflicting all of this misery, something ordinary people, normal thinking people, are simply not just going to accept. Not from our leaders or from anyone else. The Israeli government strategy is one of total siege, aimed at forcing a complete surrender from Hamas at the indiscriminate expense of many innocent Palestinian lives as it takes. And even if they got what they wanted, they wouldn't stop here, because they want the whole Gaza Strip. The whole point of the war has nothing to do with hostages either, and more to do with keeping Benjamin Netanyahu in post. And our leaders just keep supporting that aim. Their attacks, their actions are to support keeping him in power. Because that is Israel's aim right now, and they back Israel no matter what. By shifting blame to Iran, Israel just seeks to keep on doing what it has done for decades, to gain advantage, and that is destabilise the Middle East. Without evidence, all their narrative, believed unquestioningly as it always is, and publicised rampantly by pliant media, does it seek to justify further military action and obstruct those US-Iran nuclear talks. The longer this continues, the greater the risk of a broader regional war. The Houthi missile strike on Ben Gurion airport ought to come as a massive warning. Instead, Israeli arrogance and slavish Western loyalty will just see matters doubled down on in all likelihood. To the same ongoing failure to make any difference, costing lives in Yemen and costing American lives that it seems the US are no longer prepared to publicise, which should be alarming to the American people. Why else keep the numbers secret is my line of thinking here. The United States and its allies are entangled in a regional conflict with no clear end, no measurable success, and an alarming lack of transparency. Civilian casualties are mounting in Yemen, certainly, but US service members may be getting injured or dying without acknowledgement or public knowledge. Israel continues its war in Gaza with impunity, blocking humanitarian aid and using the cover of war to pursue its own interests, and only the Houthis seem prepared to do something about that. The Trump administration must be compelled to disclose casualty figures, Congress must assert itself and demand oversight over Operation Rough Rider. American people should be lobbying their representatives to that effect too. We here in the UK must do likewise, as Starmer's obsession with military participation, his boot-licking approach to dealing with Trump, and his support for Israel without equivocation don't serve any sense of national interest here either, and all merely perpetuates Tony Blair-style adventurism with the US. We all know where that led last time. And Israel must be held to account for genocide, as well as its efforts to drag the region into even wider conflict. Meanwhile, in what Israel had been caught out in strikes on a ship carrying aid to Gaza, seeking to break their blockade, they did so from Maltese airspace, just off the Maltese coast, some 2,000 kilometres away from Gaza. Get all the details of that depraved attack, carried out as it would appear with assistance from Malta, in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.